The future of Black language is not simply a question of speech. It is a question of identity, memory, and the unbreakable thread that ties millions of people to a past that was never erased, only interrupted. When we speak today, whether in English, French, Portuguese, Creole, Patois, Swahili, Yoruba, Zulu, Twi, Wolof, or any of the countless forms of expression born across the diaspora, we are not just communicating, we are reclaiming pieces of ourselves that were once stolen, suppressed, or translated into silence. There is a deep truth hidden in the sound of our voices. We speak with centuries behind us. Our rhythm is older than kingdoms. Our tone is shaped by survival. Our creativity comes from the same well that nourished empires, philosophers, poets, griots, and healers, long before the world recognized their brilliance. So when we talk about the future of Black language, we are talking about the future of a people determined to rise, a culture determined to be remembered, and a voice determined never to be muted again. The tragedies of history tried to break the connection between the African mind and the African tongue. Languages were outlawed, names were stripped, dialects were punished, and accents were mocked. But even in those times, language refused to die. It hid in the rhythms of drums, in the patterns of dance, in whispered lullabies, in coded hymns, in the way elders told stories under moonlight, in the way the family matriarch corrected you with one look, in the way laughter traveled across the room, in the way the body spoke what the tongue could not. And today that same language resurfaces in new forms, powerful forms, forms that demand respect. When a people lose their language, they lose access to their memories. But when a people reclaim their language, they regain access to their power. That is why the future of Black language is not merely about preserving words. It is about resurrecting everything those words once carried: intelligence, pride, identity, community, and direction. It's about knowing that before the world tried to define us, we had already defined ourselves. We had already named ourselves. We had already spoken ourselves into existence long before anyone wrote our stories for us. The future of Black language begins with the understanding that our linguistic roots are deeper than any translation. Africa did not speak one language. Africa spoke the world. While others built borders, Africa built bridges with words. These words created kingdoms, settled disputes, taught children, healed wounds, celebrated victories, and shaped civilization. And in the diaspora, fragments of these languages blended with new realities and created some of the most powerful dialects on earth. Dialects that influenced music, style, fashion, literature, and global culture. From hip-hop to reggae, from blues to Afrobeats, from the chants of the Caribbean to the proverbs of West Africa, from the street slang of America to Creole expressions of Haiti and Louisiana, Black language has never stopped evolving. It is alive, it breathes, it adapts, it resists, it revolutionizes, and now more than ever it is returning to its original purpose: to unify, to uplift, to educate, and to carry forward the legacy of those who fought to keep it alive. There is a power in the way Black people speak that the world continues to imitate but rarely understand. The world copies our slang without knowing the story behind it. It copies our music without knowing the pain and triumph woven into the lyrics. It copies our expressions without realizing these expressions were born from centuries of coded survival. The world hears the words, but it does not hear the journey. The future depends on whether we learn to protect the language we birth, the language we shaped, the language that travels across continents without a past. We must teach our children that the way they speak is not broken. It is brilliant. It is not improper. It is innovative. It is not incorrect. It is expressive. We must teach them that they come from a people who spoke the first languages known to humanity, who created the earliest, who taught the earliest philosophies, who built the earliest universities, who communicated with tone, rhythm, gesture, and meaning long before others understood the science of linguistics. The future of Black language is rooted in self-respect. It begins when we start correcting the narratives that told us our expression was inferior. It begins when we stop apologizing for our accents. It begins when we stop allowing others to define proper speech for us. It begins when we recognize that our linguistic creativity has shaped nations, shaped industries, shaped movements, shaped generations. Today in classrooms across the world, children of African descent are told to speak properly, but no one explains that the systems defining proper were never built to include them. These children begin to suppress the very style of communication that could make them leaders, innovators, storytellers, and thinkers. They cut off their own power, but the future changes when we remind them that their voice is a continuation of the ancestors' voice, that every time they speak, whether in slang, standard language, dialect, or African tongue, they carry the sound of a people who refuse to disappear. The voice of the past is not gone, it simply waits for us to recognize it, and when we do, something awakens. We begin to speak with confidence. We begin to speak with purpose. We begin to speak with a sense of belonging to something greater than ourselves. We begin to speak with the understanding that behind every word is a lineage that survived against the impossible. The future of Black language is not only about preserving old languages, it is about reclaiming new ones. Every generation adds its own layer of creativity, inventing words, reshaping meanings, bending grammar, breaking rules, and forming new patterns. And instead of seeing this as destruction, we must see it as evolution. That is how language survives. That is how culture lives. That is how identity grows. We must encourage linguistic pride in our communities. Speak your truth in your voice. Teach your children the names of their ancestors. Learn the languages of your roots if you can. Yoruba, Igbo, Amharic, Tigrinya, Swahili, Wolof, Shona, Fulani, Akan, Somali. But even if you cannot, let your heart speak the language of pride, resilience, and memory. Let your creativity speak for you. Let your rhythm speak for you. Let your intelligence speak for you. Let your story speak for you. Because language is not just vocabulary, it is a map. It tells you where you came from. It tells you how your people survived. It tells you why you are here. And it tells you where you are going. The future of Black language is a future where we stop letting others define us. It is a future where we understand that we are the innovators of global culture. It is a future where every Black child grows up knowing that they inherit the greatest linguistic legacy the world has ever seen. A future where our languages are documented, taught, celebrated, protected, restored, and respected. A future where our accents are honored, not mocked. A future where our dialects are studied, not dismissed. A future where our voices are heard, not silent. The future of Black language belongs to those who choose to reclaim what was lost, not to recreate the past exactly as it was, but to rebuild what it meant. You are part of that future. Every time you speak with pride, you contribute to a legacy that cannot be erased. Every time you express yourself authentically, you become a guardian of history. Every time you teach a child their cultural roots, you pass on the flame. And every time you refuse to let shame control your voice, you honor those who had their voices taken. You are not just speaking for yourself. You are speaking for millions. You are speaking for generations. You are speaking for the ancestors who whispered so you could speak loudly. You are speaking for the future that depends on the strength of your voice. Language is identity, identity is power, and power is your birthright. The future of Black language is bright, not because others will give it value, but because you will reclaim it, protect it, and carry it forward. And when you do, the world will have no choice but to listen. What if the language the world mocked is actually the language the world learned from? That question alone carries the weight of centuries. Because the truth is that many of the sounds, rhythms, expressions, and forms of speech that shaped the world did not start in classrooms, cathedrals, or royal courts. They began in the villages, the marketplaces, the families, and the traditions of African people. Long before there were grammar books or academic rules, Black people were shaping meaning with tone, rhythm, and expression that carried emotion, spirit, and precision. What the world later tried to label as broken, slang, or informal was never broken at all. It was simply unboxed. It was language that moved like music, language that danced, language that carried centuries of memory. And while society tried to suppress those sounds, those accents, those tones, it was unable to erase them because they were woven into the DNA of human communication. This is why so much of global culture today, from music to poetry to storytelling to social expression, still echoes African patterns even when people don't realize it. The world didn't just borrow from Black language, it absorbed it, depended on it, and evolved through it. For generations, Black language was treated as something to correct, something to discipline, something to remove, as if speaking with a certain rhythm or accent was a flaw that needed fixing. But what if that rhythm was actually a relic of ancient tongues? What if those tones carried the memory of the first languages spoken by humans? What if those expressions that others laughed at were actually linguistic fingerprints left by civilizations that taught the world how to speak? When enslaved Africans were forced into foreign lands and denied their ability to read or write, they still found ways to communicate with brilliance and creativity. They blended languages, invented new forms of expression, infused sound with meaning that outsiders couldn't decode, and created a cultural communication system so strong that it survived everything designed to silence it. That is not broken language, that is genius. That is survival through creativity. That is the human mind refusing to be erased. And even now the world copies the rhythms of Black speech in music, entertainments, slang, and digital culture, often without acknowledgement of where it came from. When people mock the way Black people speak, they reveal their ignorance, not your inadequacy. They show they do not understand that language is shaped by history, environment, emotion, and memory. They do not understand that the human brain codes communication in ways that reflect cultural identity, not classroom rules. They do not understand that African languages were among the first systems of organized sound, the earliest forms of symbolic communication, the original architectures of meaning. And while colonization attempted to bury those ancient languages, they survived in fragments, in cadence, in melody, in gesture, in pattern. They survived in the way Black people tell stories, the way they emphasize certain words, the way they layer meaning through tone rather than grammar. They survived in the way entire communities can share understanding through a single look, a single sound, a single shift in voice. These are not accidents. These are remnants of ancient brilliance, carried through generations in ways that academic institutions are only now beginning to study and recognize. Imagine realizing that your natural way of speaking is not a flaw but a masterpiece shaped by thousands of years of cultural evolution. Imagine understanding that the world didn't invent authenticity, it borrowed it from you. Imagine seeing how global music, from jazz to reggae to hip-hop to Afrobeats, is built on African linguistic patterns, call and response, repetition, improvisation, tonal variation. These are linguistic technologies, not slang. They are systems older than many civilizations that claim to be advanced. So when someone tells you to speak properly, remember, they are asking you to shrink yourself into a mold that was never designed for you. They are asking you to abandon a linguistic heritage that has influenced nations. They are asking you to forget that the very languages they respect have African roots deep within their structure. The truth is, you can master standard language for opportunity, but you never need to abandon the language of your lineage for identity. Your voice carries history, your accent holds power, your tone carries the memory of continents, and every time you speak the way you naturally speak, whether it's African American vernacular English, Caribbean Creole, West African Pidgin, or any dialect shaped by diaspora, you are continuing a conversation that began long before colonization, long before borders, long before oppression. You are speaking in the rhythm of your ancestors, the rhythm of people who communicated with such depth and creativity that their influence is still alive after centuries of forced separation. You are not talking wrong, you are talking with root. And when the world finally understands that the languages they admire, the expressions they imitate, the styles they monetize, all come from cultures they once dismissed. They will have no choice but to acknowledge what you already know. The language they mocked is the foundation of global expression itself. You are a carrier of the world's first voice. You are a continuation of linguistic genius. And even if the world took your land, your freedom, your names, and your histories, it could not take the sound of your soul. Your speech survived what many cultures could not survive. Your slang reshaped continents. Your rhythm reinvented communication. And every time you open your mouth, you prove a truth the world tried to hide, that African language is not lost. It lives in you. It speaks through you. It rises with you. And one day the world will not mock it. It will admit where it came from. Your voice carries the memory of nations. Every word you speak is a piece of history rising again, whether you realize it or not. When you open your mouth, you are not just expressing thoughts, you are echoing the lives, journeys, struggles, and triumphs of countless ancestors who shaped the world long before anyone tried to rewrite their place in it. Your tone, your rhythm, your expressions, your way of speaking, all of it is woven from threads of history that survived oceans, chains, colonization, erasure, ridicule, and forced silence. Yet here you are, speaking in ways that carry the DNA of civilization. Without even trying, you repeat the melodies of ancient marketplaces, the chants of fields, the inflections of sacred ceremonies, the call and response of village gatherings, the storytelling patterns that preserved knowledge before books ever existed. Every generation before you left a piece of their voice inside you, and that is why your language is never empty. It is full of memory, full of truth, full of identity. People may try to label your voice as uneducated or improper, but that is only because they do not understand the weight and origin of the sound you carry. A person who has forgotten their own history will always fail to recognize the richness in yours. When you speak, the world hears more than just your voice. They hear what survived. Your ancestors lived during times when speaking their language could cost them everything, yet they found ways to preserve fragments of it in songs, in chants, in whispers, in coded speech that only their hearts could fully understand. They hid their language in rhythm so it would never die. They hid it in tone so it could never be stolen. They hid it in the way they told stories, so their descendants would one day feel something familiar rising inside their own voices. This is why you sometimes speak with passion even when you do not mean. This is why your words carry a certain weight even when you are saying something simple. This is why your speech feels alive, layered, expressive, and powerful, because you are not just communicating, you are channeling the strength of identities the world attempted to erase. The voice you were born with is evidence that they failed. The world has always been fascinated by your voice, even when it pretended not to be. It copied your songs, borrowed your expressions, imitated your rhythms, studied your dialects, and built entire industries from the sound it once mocked. But imitation is not understanding. People may copy the style of your voice, but they cannot copy the history behind it. They cannot copy the pain that shaped its depth, the joy that shaped its melody, or the wisdom that shaped its originality. They can repeat your words, but not your meaning. They can imitate your rhythm, but not your roots. Your voice carries something too ancient, too powerful, too deeply encoded to ever be duplicated. This is why, even after everything that was taken from African people, their descendants still influence language worldwide. Your voice is not an accident, it is a continuation of a legacy the world still doesn't fully comprehend. Think about how remarkable it is that your voice survived the unimaginable. Entire cultures were broken apart, yet the sound lived. Entire families were separated, yet the rhythm remained. Entire languages were forbidden, yet the cadence resurfaced in new forms, adapted, reshaped, reborn, but never destroyed. You carry this rebirth every time you speak without even knowing it. The way you emphasize certain words, the way you laugh, the way you express emotion with tone instead of vocabulary. These are markers of ancient linguistic systems that existed long before colonization or oppression. They live inside you as naturally as breathing. You are a walking archive, a living museum, a vessel of Africa's linguistic memory. People often underestimate themselves because they think language is just grammar, punctuation, and rules invented by institutions. But language is identity. Language is inheritance. Language is proof of existence. And when you speak, you are proving every day that your story, your people's story, never disappeared. Your voice is a bridge between the past and the future. Every word you speak carries power because it represents the continuation of something that was meant to end. That alone makes your voice extraordinary. If you ever doubt your worth, listen to the way you naturally speak, not through the lens of judgment or correction, but through the lens of ancestry. Your voice has survived storms that destroyed nations. Your voice has traveled continents without ever leaving your mouth. Your voice carries maps, memories, and melodies older than written history. And even now, as you speak into microphones, classrooms, conversations, and digital spaces, you are doing what your ancestors could only dream of. You are speaking freely, loudly, boldly, with the strength of countless generations behind you. Every word is not just sound, it is a piece of history rising again, reminding the world that the voices it tried to silence are the very voices shaping its future. You are not just speaking, you are remembering. You are not just communicating, you are continuing. And when you understand that the sound of your voice is the sound of nations living through you, you will never again doubt its power. Reclaiming our language isn't about going backwards, it's about unlocking the power that was never lost, only hidden. When a people lose their language, they don't just lose words, they lose the rhythm of their identity, the memory of their ancestors. The instructions buried inside every syllable that once shaped how they thought, how they loved, how they built their world. For generations, Black people were told their languages were unimportant, uncivilized, or too complex, and because of that, many began to believe that adopting someone else's voice was the only path forward. But the truth is that power never left us. It was simply forced beneath the surface, waiting for the moment we would be ready to lift it up again. Every accent you carry, every phrase you use, every melody in your speech is a fingerprint from a continent that still speaks through you, even when you don't realize it. There is a strength that comes from understanding where your voice began. Language shapes thought, and thought shapes destiny. When your ancestors spoke, they didn't just exchange information, they passed on courage, wisdom, and coded knowledge about survival, community, and purpose. Those languages held the blueprints of kingdoms, the mathematics of trade routes, the philosophies of entire civilizations. Every time someone tries to diminish the worth of African languages, they are attempting to cut you off from the proof of your brilliance. But even after centuries of separation, the foundation remains. You can hear echoes of Yoruba in Caribbean Creole. You can hear traces of Wolof in African American vernacular. You can still feel the cadence of Bantu speech patterns in the way Black people emphasize emotion, rhythm, and storytelling. Even when the original words were stripped away, the structure, the soul, was never erased. Reclaiming language is not about replacing who you are now, it's about expanding who you can be. It's about understanding that the future does not belong to those who forget their foundation, but to those who know how to rebuild from it. When you reconnect with the languages that were taken from your lineage, you reclaim ownership of your story. You stop being a character in someone else's narrative and become the author of your own. You stop accepting labels that were placed on you and start defining yourself in the vocabulary of your ancestors. A vocabulary that was designed to lift you, not limit you. There is a deeper reason why reclaiming language matters. Languages carry worldviews. They hold emotional they teach you how to see life. Many African languages were built around community, around unity, around seeing the divine in others, and recognizing your responsibility to the collective. When those languages were suppressed, that worldview was weakened, and generations grew up speaking languages built on systems that did not see them as equal. Reclaiming African languages is not only cultural, it is psychological healing. It returns balance. It bridges the past with the present. It rebuilds self-worth in a world that still tries to convince Black people that they come from nothing. You cannot come from nothing when you come from thousands of years of linguistic genius. You don't have to speak the language fluently to reclaim it. Reclaiming is as simple as learning its phrases, honoring its sounds, discovering its origins, or understanding how it shaped the dialects you speak today. It is about knowing that your way of speaking is not broken English. It is the surviving architecture of African languages that adapted under pressure. What people mock, belittle, or misunderstand about Black speech is often the exact thing that connects you to your ancestors. The rhythm, the musicality, the improvisation, the metaphors, all of it is inherited brilliance, not accident. And the world is beginning to recognize what many tried to destroy. African languages are rising again. Scholars are uncovering their complexity. Linguists are finding hidden similarity across continents. Young people across the diaspora are learning Yoruba, Igbo, Twi, Swahili, Zulu, Amharic, Wolof. Not because it is required, but because something inside them is awakening. Something inside them knows that reclaiming a language is reclaiming strength that was buried but never gone. It is a quiet revolution taking place in classrooms, in music, in literature, and online. And every time someone speaks an African word, they are adding one more brick to a cultural foundation that will uplift generations to come. Your voice carries power, even before you understand its root. Reclaiming your language doesn't chain you to the past. It frees you to build a future with clarity. It allows you to step forward with a deeper sense of self. It reminds you that you are not starting from zero. You are continuing a legacy. The world may have tried to silence the tongues of your ancestors, but it failed to silence their spirit. That spirit still lives in you, and once you choose to reclaim it, you activate a force that cannot be broken again.